Outright Action International, working for LGBTIQ rights globally. And I will be chairing today's session. Welcome to everyone. A couple of sort of house rules to start. So this session will be recorded and be made available afterwards. To all of our attendees, please use the chat box for any questions or comments, and please also feel free to introduce yourself. It's really nice for us to know where everyone is from. And when you send something to the chat, just make sure you send it to panelists and attendees so everyone can see it. That is the best, and you just make that little setting as you chat. You can also, when we get to the questions and answers, you can also use the function in Zoom to raise your hand. Please keep your microphones muted, of course, when you're not speaking. I think that's all we need in terms of rules. I really want to appreciate the organizers and co-sponsors of this important event. Women leaders as advocates for equality and inclusion of LGBTI persons. And the organizers and co-sponsors are, of course, Parliamentarians for Global Action, the missions of Argentina, Chile, Denmark, Mexico, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and the United States of America to the United Nations, Outright Action International, Copenhagen 2021, and LGBT Denmark. I also very much want to appreciate the panelists who will be sharing their best practices and challenges of their work as women leaders advocating for equality and inclusion of LGBTI people. Honorable Lenora Qereqeretabua, Member of Parliament of Fiji. Honorable Valerie Woods, Speaker of the House of Representatives of Belize. Honorable Esther Passaris, Member of the National Assembly of Kenya. Ms. Ellemann, Member of Parliament of Denmark. And Diputada Lucía Riojas, Member of the Chamber of Deputies of Mexico. As we're opening this morning, I'm going to give the floor to the Deputy Permanent Representative of Denmark to the United Nations, Her Excellency Marie-Louise Qereqeretabua. Please, let's see. I actually don't see Marie-Louise here. Let me check with my colleagues. Oh, okay, yes, Marie-Louise Qereqeretabua is here. So you have the floor. Very welcome, thank you. I think we're just dealing with a quick technical issue. Please. Marie-Louise Qereqeretabua, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. Success. Good morning, and thank you very much, Maria. You know, life is full of mysteries, and one such to me is how love between two consenting adults on equal terms can be a threat to society, something even to be criminalized. And I think this is in itself a mystery, but the mystery is somehow double when you think about that in many of these same societies, it is perfectly acceptable, often legal, to marry off children, young girls, to adult men. But the fact is, of course, that both phenomena are results of the same societal power structures in conservative patriarchies. And therefore also I think it makes a lot of sense to look at the struggle of women and girls and the struggle of LGBTI plus persons in conjunction, as we are going to do today. The freedom to choose one's partner, to decide over your own body, and to openly express and live by one's sexual orientation and gender identity is fundamental, whether you are LGBTI person or young girl. So Denmark, we are very happy and honored to co-host this side event together with Argentina, Chile, Mexico, the Netherlands, the US, as well as Parliamentarians for Global Action, Copenhagen 2021, Outright Action International, LGBTI plus Denmark, to focus on this important agenda and to see that so many of you have decided to join us today. Denmark remains deeply concerned about the violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity and the ongoing neglect of LGBTI persons' basic rights to decide over their own body and life. A tendency, of course, which is only exacerbated during COVID-19. And as an SRHR champion and co-leader of the Action Coalition on SRHR and Bodily Autonomy, we are deeply concerned that access to basic sexual and reproductive health and rights services, also for LGBTI plus persons, continue to be denied. We are strongly committed to take a stand for LGBTI plus persons' rights and for diversity, and to keep working to further the human rights of the LGBTI plus community all around the world. And allow me to give just a few examples of recent actions taken. In 2018, Denmark developed an action plan for LGBTI plus persons, which allocated funds to combat violence against LGBTI plus persons and piloted a project on counseling trans persons, among other initiatives. In 2020, the Danish government, launched 10 legislative proposals to protect LGBTI plus persons against hate crimes, hate speech, and discrimination. And in 2021, Denmark is very proud to co-host or to host Copenhagen 2021, bringing together World Pride and Eurogame in August. This will be the biggest LGBTI plus event on Danish ground ever, and Denmark will make use of the Copenhagen 2021 platform to promote LGBTI plus rights globally. It is an aim to become the most inclusive LGBTI plus event in the world and to create a globally visible World Pride and Eurogames. And therefore, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs also financially support the 2021 Human Rights Forum to support meaningful and active participation of LGBTI plus activists from the Global South in Copenhagen 2021. We very much hope you will all join us in this work, not just today during CSW, but also in Copenhagen in August and basically every single day, because as much as we are happy to see so many participants here today, we also hope that we don't need to rally around the cause in the future. We hope that equal rights for all actually will mean equal rights for all very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are going to continue in our program, and our next speaker is Ms. Petra Beyer, a member of Parliament of Austria and a board member of Parliamentarians for Global Action. Please, Ms. Beyer, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maria. Dear colleagues and friends, I have a plenary session today in Parliament, and I hope that it's not too loud in the background. On behalf of Parliamentarians for Global Action, I would like to express our gratitude to our co-organizing partners for this event, which were already mentioned, to all the ambassadors, members of Parliament, and public officials delivering remarks, and to everyone who is joining us today from around the world. I saw at the chat that there are really people from everywhere in this world, and that's really great. Parliamentarians for Global Action, or PGA, is the largest non-governmental multi-party international network of individual legislators with over 1,100 members in 131 parliaments worldwide. PGA informs and mobilizes parliamentarians to promote human rights, peace, democracy, gender equality, and inclusion. PGA's global campaign against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity raised awareness among parliamentarians about equality and non-discrimination, strengthens communication and cooperation between parliamentarians and the LGBTI civil society, and advocates for anti-discrimination legislation and decriminalization of consensual same-sex relations. Since launching this global campaign in 2013, BGA has facilitated meaningful interactions between parliamentarians and representatives from the LGBTI community in Africa, Asia and the Pacific, Eastern Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean. And PGA members have contributed to the adoption of LGBTI affirming legislation in Angola, Bolivia, Chile, El Salvador, Mozambique, Nepal, Pakistan and the Seychelles. We are delighted to co-organize today's conversation with women parliamentarians from Belize, Denmark, Fiji, Kenya, and Mexico, who will share their experience in working towards equality and inclusion of LGBTI people in their countries. As legislators, we are tasked with making and amending laws to guarantee the full enjoyment of rights by all our constituents. An important element of this responsibility is to listen and to working with other stakeholders, including representatives of civil society, to collect testimonies and data about the stigma and violence faced by LGBTI people, as well as their unequal access to healthcare, education, employment, housing, and justice, just to mention some. At the Council of Europe, a colleague of mine worked on a report about the situation of LGBTIQ persons in the Czech Republic in Russia, and we had a hearing on that, and I really was shocked about cases of abduction, arbitrary detention, and even torture of men who were presumed to be gay. That doesn't fit into the 21st century to judge somebody or to treat somebody even just due to their love or to their feelings. And of course, all members of parliament have the responsibility to uphold the rights of all their constituents without exception. But female parliamentarians in particular, due to the discrimination experienced by women, have a special understanding of the need to address inequalities and defend the social inclusion of marginalized groups. Therefore, women parliamentarians have a powerful voice to advocate for the right of LGBTI people and are well placed to champion equality and non-discrimination. So PGA is really honored to be an executive partner of Copenhagen 2021 and support this important international effort to increase knowledge and understanding among elected officials about their role in guaranteeing equality and inclusion of LGBTI people. Our vision as an organization, quote, to contribute to the creation of a rules-based international order for a more equitable, safe and democratic world, unquote, deeply aligns with the objects and the United Nations Development Agenda. In particular, Sustainable Development Goal 16, which I talked about an hour ago in our plenary, highlights the need to ensure that challenges faced by LGBTI people and other marginalized or vulnerable groups, challenges regarding access to justice, political participation, and real equality and inclusion are addressed effectively in every country. Today's conversation serves as precursor to the LGBTI Interparliamentary Plenary Assembly, which will take place in Copenhagen in August this year, where we will be discussing these challenges and the role of parliamentarians in promoting the human rights of LGBTI people. This global convening will provide an important platform to identify concrete actions that we can take in our countries with a network of supportive parliamentarians by our side. And to come to an end, I really am looking forward to learning from my colleagues and the rest of participants in today's exchange and to continue this conversation during the Interparliamentary Plenary Assembly next August in Copenhagen, hopefully in person then. As political leaders, we need to keep fostering dialogue and collaboration among each other with civil society representatives to inspire action towards advancing equality and inclusion for all in our societies. Thank you very much, and let's use today's forum to launch this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Petra. We are going to continue quickly in our program, and our next speaker is Ms. Lisa Peterson, the Senior Bureau Official for Civil Security, Democracy and Human Rights, and Acting Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor with the U.S. Department of State. Please, Ms. Peterson.
Greetings to everyone assembled virtually here today. Let me begin by extending my sincere thanks to the government of Denmark, Parliamentarians for Global Action, Outright Action International, and all of the other co-sponsors for organizing today's event. I'm delighted to be with you all and to have the opportunity to contribute to this important conversation on behalf of the United States. We know that ensuring equal opportunities for all people to participate in civic and political life is consistent with universal human rights and democratic principles. Governments that uphold their obligation to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms are more likely to reflect the interests of all citizens, contributing to the greater well-being of all members of society. Unfortunately, human rights abuses against women and girls remain commonplace in many countries around the world. Structural barriers through discriminatory laws and policies often limit women's access to justice, health, education, and employment opportunities, and creates obstacles to their full employment and their full participation in the political process. The underlying causes of gender-based oppression that restrict women's meaningful participation in civic and political life are often the same issues that threaten the safety, security, and dignity of LGBTQI+ persons and members of other vulnerable groups. In at least 72 countries, laws that criminalize individuals on the basis of sexual orientation and/or gender identity often exclude LGBTQI+ persons from civic and political participation and create barriers to advocating for their rights due to the fear of persecution, prosecution, and violence. Women and girls, LGBTQI+ persons, members of racial, ethnic, and religious minority groups, migrants, refugees, older persons, and persons with disabilities often face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, making them more vulnerable to insecurity. Women and girls, including those who are lesbian, bisexual, transgender, particularly trans women of color, queer, and intersex, are at a higher risk of suffering sexual and gender-based violence. Given their experience with systemic discrimination, women in positions of visible leadership, including peace builders, human rights defenders, and civil society leaders, journalists, and public officials, are uniquely positioned to create linkages between concerned populations in order to advance measures that address the full well-being of LGBTQI+ communities. Through global advocacy efforts, women in civil society leadership roles can raise awareness of the human rights situation of LGBTQI+ persons and support their participation and civic engagement. Women and LGBTQI+ parliamentarians can promote legislation supporting equality and non-discrimination, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. As Vice President Harris stated in her remarks at this year's commission, the status of democracy depends fundamentally on the empowerment of women. With that in mind, we are committed to working across the US government with the newly established White House Gender Policy Council to protect the human rights of women and girls in all their diversity at home and abroad, and to restore America as a champion for gender equity and equality. We are also mainstreaming LGBTQI+ human rights issues into our broader bilateral and multilateral engagement, and ensuring that US strategies, policies, and programs are informed by an analysis of gender power and conflict dynamics consistent with our commitments under the US Strategy for Women, Peace, and Security. The United States will continue to lead the coalition of government, corporate, and foundation partners who support emergency assistance and human rights programming for grassroots LGBTQI+ organizations and individuals to obtain protection or catalyze positive change through the Global Equality Fund. Indeed, we're grateful for the steadfast partnership with today's co-hosts, Denmark, Chile, and Argentina. We look forward to our continued close cooperation with the UN LGBTI Core Group, the Equal Rights Coalition, and other international initiatives aimed at working towards the full equality of all, including LGBTQI+ persons. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here with you today, and I look forward to listening to this morning's discussion.
Thank you so much, Ms. Peterson. I have to say, chairing this session today and this panel is a great pleasure. I know we've all sat in on and been part of panels where women are very a small minority. And so to have this chance to chair a panel where every speaker is a woman feels great. So we are now going to start with our panel discussion. And I'm going to ask one or two questions of each of our panelists. And our first speaker is Honorable Lenora Qereqeretabua, Member of Parliament of Fiji. And my question to you is, how have you worked with other stakeholders, including civil society, to achieve progress for LGBTI individuals in your context? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Maria. I hope everyone can hear me. It's very early in the morning here in Fiji. We're on the where we see the first dawn of every day. So it's 9 minutes to 2 on Thursday morning, and I almost missed my alarm clock, but it's wonderful to see you all this morning. It's a real honor to be here. I'm also a member of PGA, and I, as a heterosexual Fijian woman, am very proud to be part of this group. We need more women leaders to be speaking up for our LGBTI plus family members and communities. In Fiji, I've been working with a few of the activist organizations, and I want to tell you first of all about the Rainbow Pride Foundation of Fiji. It's a non-profit organization registered here in Fiji that advocates for the human rights of LGBTI plus persons, so that they're respected and able to live with dignity, free from discrimination, persecution, and violence, and where the human rights are upheld. Its mandate includes promoting LGBTQI rights and equality, social justice, health, and well-being. The experiences here and their challenges are something that are not experienced by non-LGBTI plus residents in Fiji. In 1997, Fiji became only the second country in the world after South Africa to explicitly protect against discrimination based on sexual orientation in our constitution. In 2009, that constitution was abolished by the government that took over via a coup. The new constitution, promulgated in September of 2019, bans discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender-based and gender identity or expression. However, in Fiji, same-sex marriage remains banned, and reports of societal discrimination and bullying are not uncommon. with Fijians with diverse sexual and gender identities and expressions, they still face many levels of discrimination and are marginalized. And this prevents people of diverse sexual and gender identities from accessing basic health and other social services, including education, obtaining fair treatment, and equal justice in the court of law. There's really no protection from homophobes and bullying in schools, online, and they're unable to fully express themselves in different spaces, including their own families, communities, and churches, workplaces, and public spaces. Now, the Rainbow Pride Foundation has been working in political spaces to try and sensitize and create awareness amongst our leaders in Fiji and to lobby for the strengthening of our policies to eliminate stigma and violence and discrimination faced by people with diverse sexual and gender identities. And one of the needs that was identified by stakeholders has been a need for perhaps some training for us in Parliament to provide guidance, practical tips, and information to support us in Parliament in Fiji to undertake legislative, representational, and oversight activities for the protection of members of the LGBTI plus community. So last year, the Rainbow Pride Foundation reached out to a few of us in Parliament as they embarked on a project to develop a sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sexual characteristics handbook for Fiji parliamentarians. And the Rainbow Pride Foundation aims to have this handbook launched on the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biophobia on the 17th of May in the Parliament of Fiji. And that would be history in the making in Fiji.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting to hear about that cooperation between civil society and parliamentarians. And also, thank you so much for getting up in the middle of the night to speak to us. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are now, I'm going to ask a couple of questions of Honorable Valerie Woods of Belize. How has your experience as a woman, politician, and leader informed your work on inclusion and equality of marginalized groups? And what are the challenges to advance LGBTI equality in Belize, and how do you think these challenges can be overcome?
Morning, Maria, and I'm very glad to be part of the panel at this important discussion. I have to admit, thankfully, it's not as early as my colleague in the Fiji Islands. As most of you may be already aware, in 2016, Belize had its landmark ruling on the matter of same-sex, and it was decriminalized. But it's my experience back then. I was a senator. I've only recently been elected as the Speaker of the House, and the experience is still the same in the sense that laws and legislative change is one thing, but to change minds and hearts, that's going to take a little bit longer for the wider public. It's so important that parliamentarians, regardless of their personal views and regardless if it's in government or out of government, that all parliamentarians must always be reminded that the international human rights conventions that we signed on to apply to all of our constituents, not just some of our constituents. And so we have to respect the human rights of all. I think it's so important that civil society continue to do the work in engaging parliamentarians. I'll be the first to admit that allies within the room may be few, but they do exist. And we need to continue as much as possible to educate parliamentarians. My experience in the time spent in the Senate and now just so recently in the House is that we cannot assume that all parliamentarians come with that knowledge regarding the LGBTI community and the experience of having heard or listened to the stories of so many members of the community, which is absolutely critical. So I would definitely say that beyond just legislative change, it is important that the work continues whereby parliamentarians and civil society continue that dialogue. As some of you may or may not be aware, in Belize, it was last year that a lot of effort was put into bringing a bill to the House, an equal opportunities bill, but it was withdrawn from the table. So it has not even been presented yet for discussion. So there's a lot of room again for civil society to continue that very important dialogue with parliamentarians and legislators to understand what changes need to occur and how those changes can occur. As a woman, I think this discussion today is quite fitting because women, we certainly have had our share of discrimination. We certainly have experienced inequality, both inside and outside of the profession, in our homes, outside of our homes, in Parliament. And so I think we have such a powerful voice to lend to the discussion of equality and inclusion for the LGBTI community, because we have faced a lot of that discrimination and exclusion because of our gender, quite frankly. And so I'm very grateful that we're having this discussion. We need to have more of it. And I'm the first one to admit that it's not necessarily going to be easy, the process to change minds and hearts, but I strongly believe that where you find an ally or two, you stay very close to them, because that's where you're going to grow that community of allies to make sure that change comes. And I'm very optimistic that it will come.
Thank you so much. Really great to hear that you're optimistic. And I think we can all take your advice to stay close to our allies when we find them. We're really something that I think all of us from civil society know to do. I'm next going to go to Honorable Esther Passaris, a member of parliament from Kenya. And the questions I want to ask for you is, what are some of the entry points to discuss the human rights of LGBTI people in Kenya? And what advice would you give to civil society representatives when engaging with parliamentarians?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invite, and I'm honored to be here. I'm also a member of PGA, and yeah, I mean, in Kenya, we do have organizations like we've got MSM, we've got the LGBTQI, but most of them are not registered. I think there was an attempt to get registered as a recognized body, but it was not allowed. And of course, there's been attempts to also amend the laws so that we can decriminalize sodomy. It's in our, the sodomy is a felony as per section 162 of the Kenya Penal Code and punishable by 14 years. Same-sex marriages are definitely not agreed on, not allowed by our courts. I think on the 24th of May in 2019, the High Court of Kenya refused to order to declare sections 162 and 165 unconstitutional. The state does not recognize same-sex marriages. But having said that, Kenya, when we look at our neighboring countries, we are not as hard. The government is not as hard. We've had a few incidences in Mombasa where people are frog marched and taken down by society. But we have discussions around it, open discussions. Like I once went to a forum where UNAIDS was organizing a forum, and they were there, and they came in their numbers and they communicated their issues, not just to civil society and the UN, but also to government. We've had forums where the DCI has sat in and listened to the plight of a lot of people in terms of how the law comes in for them. So the conversations are happening, but silently. And members of parliament are aware that we do have this society that needs protection, that needs their rights to be also respected. But not many people are willing to come out or open. I think I'm probably one of the only members of parliament that will come out and advocate both on my social media platforms as well as in Parliament with my fellow parliamentarians, that this is a society that we need to protect. We're strong in terms of the Catholic Church, even though we're a secular state. The Catholic Church has got deep-rooted, it's deeply rooted in the state and how we manage things. And our Parliament tends to want to do a lot of things to please the Catholic Church. And even my stance with abortion, pro-choice, has also met a lot of brick walls. And our recent attempt to amend the sexual reproductive health laws also hit a brick wall, because the Catholic Church really makes it its business to ensure that some of these things, including getting vaccinations for COVID, would be an issue, because they just take a stance. But I think we need, I'm happy about Copenhagen. I think it would be a good start, because we all need building blocks. We need to be able to make sure that we can work together with private sector. And I think in our country, we've got a lot of companies that are there that are from foreign countries which respect the LGBTQI rights. And they could also move by example, creating opportunities, jobs, support groups, funding. There's a lot. Like when we were giving out food during the pandemic, we also recognized that society, we gave them food. But then there was this issue that, do the donors who've given us food, for instance, if we show that we're giving their food to this community, we might not receive any more food from them. So what do we do? So, you give it. And then does this community want to come out openly? But I recently, over Christmas, went for a function of sex workers. And everybody was like, what are you doing with them? I said, they exist in our society, so we have to recognize them and we have to support them, because even during this pandemic, the sex workers are actually also, they have special needs. And they're also coming up on their own and getting stronger. So all I want to say is we've got, the community is there. They have support within each other, but we need to do more. And I know that UNAIDS is doing an amazing job in trying to make sure that, we can bridge the gaps where we need to. So how do we engage? We don't put everything under the carpet. I'm one person at the moment. I hope that in the future, there'll be another 5 or 10 people that will be open to discussing this openly, because people feel like, this is a small community of voters. So if I support them, won't I lose support from the majority and lose my political seat? So of course, there's that risk involved where you want to serve the entire community, but by serving this community, you might lose your political seat. But then I think that's a question of why are you in it? Are you in it because of just the political seat, or are you in it because you want to serve every citizen, because they're citizens too, and their rights are being violated, and they also have rights. And human rights, if we're talking about human rights, we cannot neglect the LGBTQI. So I feel the conversations that we've been having so far, but we need to strengthen. We can't have these conversations without strengthening the organizations in the country. Now, strengthening the organizations in the country, of course, the government will put blocks in how they can access the funding, because they think that, when you're funding them, you're funding immorality. So we need to also educate them. So I think the dialogues with parliamentarians, which will probably have to be closed door dialogues where people can actually speak and understand. Majority do understand, but they will not openly support. They recognize that we do have a community here that has special needs, that needs to be recognized. And for me, the fact that here are 2 consenting adults that want to love each other and they can't express that love and live together is wrong. I don't think we should pass judgment. And I always say to Kenyans, I said, you know what, God didn't hire me as an assistant. Only he can judge people. And I feel that, holding this moral card on the LGBTQI is totally wrong, because none of us are perfect. And as far as I'm concerned, I have quite a number of LGBTQI friends, and they're superhuman beings, just like any other human being. So I don't think being heterosexual makes you a better human being than an LGBTQI. So I stand for them. I've seen intersex families with intersex. Recently, we've seen there's some changes going on in terms of the law recognizing that there is this community, and they can be allowed to change their names in the future. They can be, and we've had some landmark rulings in that respect. So I feel it's moving as slow as the funding is available to make them come out and be open. I believe that the mere fact that the DCI sat in a room where men talked about members of the LGBTI talked about what they go through in terms of there was a lesbian woman who'd been raped more than once because she was an Uber driver. She was doing very well, and whenever she'd walk with her partner, she would be once or twice she was raped, and she said, why? They're trying to change me. They think that by raping me, they'll change me from being lesbian. I'm not going to change. I'm a lesbian. This is my partner. This is the woman I love. And the DCI sat there and he listened through this story. And then you had another man who, he says, look, so they think I'm gay. And then what do? They sodomize me, 5 of them. They abuse me. They rape me. So who do I go to? So when you hear these stories, you think that, there are some genuine concerns about how their rights are being violated. And I believe that we have to continue engaging and continue funding them. And, I'm creating opportunities for them where they are able to organize themselves. I'm able to give them funding to be able to start projects and businesses. And the pandemic has hit that community very, very hard because when jobs are cut, and then you're looking for a job in the future, it's very difficult. And majority of them work in the service industry in terms of hotels, bars, and restaurants. And those were the most impacted during tourism. Those were the most impacted. But in terms of also surgical requirements, I think they've strengthened themselves in terms of hotlines, they've strengthened themselves. But I cannot say that it's been easy because without funding, they can do very little. So we were very happy that we were able to help them out during the pandemic to give them interventions through my office, just like we gave everyone else. Because for me, LGBTQ rights are human rights and they cannot be neglected. So I'm looking forward to Copenhagen, and I'm looking forward to how we can give them more support so that they can be a strength for each other in all areas that they're being affected negatively. I mean, somebody did mention earlier that, Maria, that, in this society that's patriarchal, we have children that are being married off early, or women that are young girls that are enduring FGM. Yes, we have all that, and all that needs to be addressed, and it's wrong. So the society that has that, and the society that has LGBTQI, it's just one society. It's our world that has not reached a point where they respect, women and their rights as well. So there is an element of patriarchy as well that has dominated and refused some of these things. So we've got to look at it in terms of culture as well. This culture that says this is how we do things, and that it's wrong, because at the end of the day, we've seen that these cultures of marrying of a girl early, this culture of FGM, so the culture of also condemning what God has created in his own image beautifully and perfectly, because we think that we're better. Also, I believe that in time, it will be done away with. When I stand in Parliament sometimes and I hear the criticism, that comes across when we just bring up a topic, I feel that we've got a long way to go, but we're getting there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Passaris. And I couldn't agree more. As at Outright, we always believe that change happens when you have a movement. So hearing you talk about the importance of supporting the movement in Kenya and beyond is incredibly important. Our next panelist is Ms. Ellemann, Member of Parliament from Denmark. And the question I'm going to ask you is, can you please share a best practice of Denmark to advance equality and inclusion of LGBTI people? And what strategies have been helpful in your parliamentary work to raise awareness and build consensus for equality for LGBTI persons? Ms. Ellemann, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation. And
Sorry for checking in late. I'm actually acting Speaker of Parliament for the time being, and I had to be in the plenary for a debate, and that's why I check in late. But I've been looking very much forward having this debate with you on an extremely important subject. You gave me two specific questions, and I think that's a very good way to put it, because what are best practices from a Danish point of view that I can share with you, and hopefully we can inspire each other to do it even better, because even though we are in the high ranking when we do the international benchmarking when it comes to rights and lives of LGBTI persons, or LGBT plus, that's what I prefer to say because it's easier. But anyway, we still have a long way to go, because when we look at the statistics, this is a group of people who are still very vulnerable, who lives they decide to hide their sexual orientation because of risk of harassment, because of risk of discrimination. And even in this, in many ways, well-functioning country as Denmark is. And that's why in the Danish Parliament, we take this question extremely serious, and we work with it very thoroughly, and we keep on working with it. And what I would start to point out is that this is cross-party. It's not that we have any political parties who says we will not debate this. Everyone knows that this is a basic human right to be who you are, to love who you want to be, no matter what sexual orientation, race, social, whatever. So this is very important to say that this is cross-party. And that's why this is one of my best practices, is that we actually make sure that these debates take place cross-party. So it's not only from a only political party point of view. Then what we did some years ago, and honestly, I was very proud to be in part of the former government, and this is continuing with the new government. And even though we've had a shift, now it's more a socialist government, former it was a liberal government, but this goes on just to emphasize the cross-party thing. But in the former government, I was a minister in that government, Minister of Equal Opportunities, Gender Equality, but also the cross-sector responsible for LGBT plus rights. And having a prime minister who emphasizes the importance of this subject and that it is a cross-sector question, that's very important. So I was the first LGBT plus minister, and that makes me very proud to have had this position. We made the first ever, I think, national LGBT plus action plan. And this action plan is not only cross-party, of course, adopted by government, presented by government, but it's also a cross-ministerial assignment. One of the things in this action plan is to actually be very thorough on all the legislation we have in this country and put an amplifier, an LGBT plus amplifier on all legislation to make sure that this is not, and it might be without planned intention, but it could be very discriminating. So trying to eliminate whatever discriminatory legislation we have, that's one very important point of view. And then also, one of you had in the chat right now the question of religious leaders. What about marriage? I mean, this is a very, very important, to me, a very important sign of accepting people in your country, no matter what sexual orientation, no matter what partner, no matter what love life. So this is very important that religious leaders accept this,
support this. I know it's not, it's easy to say, it's extremely difficult, but the dialogue is what can bring this forward. In our parliamentary work, what really helps us to raise awareness and to build this consensus that exists in Denmark, we have a SRHR cross-party committee. And this committee, we have, I mean, in the Danish parliament, we have 179 members. I can tell you that more than 1/3 of members of parliament are members of this cross-party network, cross-party committee. And that shows you, I mean, it's basically all political parties except for one new political right-wing party, but they just entered parliament. So I don't think it's because they have anything against the network. It's simply because they are just starting up as a political party. So this also emphasizes the cross-party support. What we do, just to give you an example, is that we arrange all kinds of debates and different discussions with experts on this area. For instance, last year we could celebrate the 50th anniversary on sexual education in the ground schools of Denmark. This is something we have had for 50 years. And making this celebration, it was not a drink of champagne only. I mean, of course, we celebrated that we have a very proud and important tradition of sexual education. But what we also did was, in the panel, we make sure to invite representatives from different LGBTI working NGOs, working groups. So we make sure to hear voices of people who really feel it on their own bodies, feel the harassment, feel whatever challenges there are in their lived lives. So this is for me also very important, that we in all aspects make sure that we include LGBT plus or LGBTQ. Let's not start the debate on the letters. I say LGBT plus. I'm leaving no one, I'm excluding no one. So for me, it's just very important that we all know the importance of emphasizing this, know the importance of making sure that you actually can live openly and not experience what we see in various documents and various examinations. You see people saying that they are hiding, which is of course not acceptable. One last point I will make is that I think initiatives like the European Rainbow Map, that we get these kind of information, that we have this kind of benchmark. This is the one way to make sure that we know what works needs to be done, but also the benchmark and also the opportunity to actually be inspired by other countries, by organizations in general. So these kind of benchmark tools, to me, I think those are very important, and I think, yeah. So I think you said that I had 5 to 7 minutes. I forgot to time it, but Maria, is time up?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, but thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you very much. So we are now going to go to our next speaker, Diputada Lucía Riojas from Mexico. And please, my questions for you are, what are the main challenges that you have personally faced as a parliamentarian working on LGBTI inclusion? And what arguments have you used to persuade some of your colleagues to think differently about LGBTI equality? So Diputada Riojas, please.
Thank you, Maria. First of all, I would like to thank the permanent mission of Denmark to the United Nations, and of course all PGA members for having me here. I don't have so much highlights or lowlights of what's happening with the push for human rights of women and LGBTI community in Mexico, because I think it's more like glimmers of hope within waves of apathy. This is due mostly to the fact that on paper, Mexico is a country that guarantees the rights of all its citizens, but the reality, however, is radically different. I have to say that as a first Congresswoman being in the first legislature with gender parity in the history of Mexico feels both important and difficult to believe. I have no point of comparison, of course, but I cannot imagine that in a legislative body of 500 deputies, as is Mexico's lower house, it once seemed acceptable for the vast majority to be male. In a country so ravaged by inequality, so much of which is fueled by misogyny, it seemed only logical that parity would be a substantial win. So it was undoubtedly an incredible victory for women's representation, and one we absolutely cannot ever retreat from. Yet it was discouraging to see the historic legislature did not live up to its potential. Since there is no real feminist agenda driving most of my colleagues, and the president's will is always made into law. So there have been few significant improvements to women's well-being and many important setbacks. In terms of LGBT community, there's a similar story. Doing what is politically least costly and most beneficial generally translates to a continuation of similar policies to those of past administrations. So in Mexico, women have been full political subjects since 1953, when we were allowed to vote for elected officials and be voted into office. This was achieved much before having full control over our bodies and reproductive rights nationwide. It is in fact still very difficult for women in 30 out of 32 states of federal entities to access safe, legal, and free abortions. Though it is legal to interrupt a pregnancy within the first trimester of in the entire country. That is only under certain considerations. So Mexico City and Oaxaca are the only states to permit abortion simply because of the mother's decision. Although we could never speak for women or the LGBTI community as monolithic, a universal demand across all spaces of activism is justice, making justice more accessible and tangible to victims of all kinds of violence. The current administration has taken that to mean punitivism and its most ridiculous extent. Although impunity is rampant in the country and over 90% of crimes never get solved, there has been a populist push for increased sentences and for more crimes to be considered sufficiently grave for preventative prison. These kinds of measures only serve to increase inequality, as those left facing a corrupt judicial system are generally people with the least financial solvency or social capital. Hence, it seems obvious to me that the answer has to lie beyond punitivism. The further away we get from thinking that punishment is and the fear of it are the best incentives for our societies to prosper, the better. That won't come simply from a critical mass of women in power, but from a critical mass of feminists who uphold the human rights for everyone. So I think it's also important, an important way to gauge whether it is the left or the right that has a stronghold on ideology is by assessing the discourse around trans women and trans rights. In Mexico, it's certainly encouraging to see bills and initiatives aimed to ratifying trans rights have begun to circulate at the national and state level. Unfortunately, certain trans exclusionary groups have been catapulted into the center of mainstream conversation, both within and outside of feminist spaces. There is still a long way to go, however, as only a handful of states have laws, legal mechanisms, or policies in place for all people to affirm their gender through official documentations. Law for children and young adults to change their birth certificates gained a bit of traction before facing greater opposition by conservative fractions. Whilst initiatives seeking to ban so-called conversion therapies have also been front and center. Though there was a big social media campaign and raise awareness that the government was pushing to ban these practices, there is little evidence that banning them will in any way diminish their offer or demand. The abusive practices charlatan doctors and healers enact on mostly LGBT youths are not going to be abolished by decree because they have to do with deeper issues and market availability, stigma and rejection against queer youths, and cultural or religious beliefs that are informed only by prejudice. So regarding trans exclusionary groups, their rhetoric echoes of that of conservative right-wing segments of society as well as religious extremists. This is a matter organized feminists have to confront head-on. Violence against trans women means their life expectancy in Mexico is barely 35. I have no doubt that upholding a binary essentialist view that is discriminatory and continues to expand zero-sum views of power is standing in the way of progress. So this is a little bit of what's been happening in Mexico. We also have been beyond the state of different legislative discussions. In my personal experience, I and people close to me have faced threats regarding our activism in Refugio Casa Frida. Casa Frida is was born as a temporary shelter for LGBTI youths facing difficulties in quarantine during the first months of the pandemic. However, by the end of last year, when it was clear that we had filled a need for our community, we transitioned to permanent status. Casa Frida is a perfectly clear example of the many spaces the state has left empty and the ways community organizations seek to fill them. When we began the project in May last year, we transformed an office building into a shelter for over a dozen people. And by the end of the year, we moved to a proper house, meant saying goodbye to a makeshift space where over 50 people have found temporary home. Many have arrived with an urgent need for medical services. Many have sought legal aid for specific situations of violence or harassment, but all have required mental health counseling. So this is, that's it for now. This is a little bit of what's happening in Mexico and how we have to organize to overcome all these things in our ways. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diputada Riojas. We're going to move into an interactive dialogue, and I actually want to start with a question for you, since I have you on screen and you have your microphone handy. So there is a question: what has to be done to guarantee that Mexico's government commits to the 7 recommendations on LGBT rights that it received from the Universal Periodic Review? If you can just give a quick comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there needs to be a lot of pressure towards the government, especially from civil society and, of course, activists, because there is, our government is thinking very much like a conservative group. So we need to do a lot of pressure. We need to be as present as we can be to push this agenda. But I think that's the main answer to, social pressure towards the government.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give the floor now to Ms. Alicia Kearns, Member of Parliament of the UK, for a quick comment, please.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. I think the Commission on the Status of Women is the ideal place really for us to talk clearly and say clearly in one voice that there should be no place for identity-based abuse in this world. Since my election in 2019 as a Conservative MP, I've been campaigning to ban so-called LGBTQ conversion therapy, because that is still legal, even in the UK and across the vast majority of countries in the world, as we've talked about this morning. I'm really delighted to have secured the commitment of my Prime Minister to ban this, and I hope that'll be coming forward. And I'm pleased that it is a Conservative party that has banned this and also brought in same-sex marriage. Just very quickly, I noticed a lot of people have been asking questions about how we respect religion. I think this is such an important question because religious liberty is fundamental, but so is the liberty to live your life free of identity-based violence. So from my perspective, this is about protecting conversations between religious leaders and their flock. It's not a fight between faith and unbelief, but it's about stopping those who abuse their authority and giving victims who've been abused the recourse to justice. This can all be done in a way that respects individual liberties, but protects people's fundamental rights. And unfortunately, too many countries around the world still do criminalise same-sex relations. I think it's so important that we come together as women to challenge this. Obviously, the UK in June 2019 took over the role of co-chair of the Equal Rights Coalition in partnership with Argentina. And we committed to a 5-year strategy to guide that work of the ERC and its 42 member countries to make the most of advancing the LGBTQ opportunity for equality. So I'm really delighted that we actually plan to launch that strategy later this month. And I hope that will result in improved freedoms for LGBTQ plus peoples around the world. And obviously I hope that many of you will be able to join the first ever LGBTQ plus rights conference in London next year. I think, you know, there is such opportunity for progress, and I wish you every success in Copenhagen. I hope it's a real success, and I hope by then that we've banned conversion therapy in the UK, because we are going to be bringing forward that legislation. But I also want to finish by making one final point, because I know I was told I had 2 minutes, and I plan to try and stick to that because it's difficult to do so. But I do think that today's event is important, not only as we talk through the depth of the issues, but because it's a chance for us as women, as allies and as parliamentarians to publicly declare that we are united across the world, that love is not conditional, LGBTQ plus people do not need to change, love is not a pathology, and all LGBTQ plus people deserve to live their lives freely and with the respect and protections afforded to all people. And actually it's important that we don't forget that LGBTQ people need to hear us say that, and they need to know that we mean it, because for too long politicians haven't been saying these things. So I'm proud to say it, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to join you today. And watch this space. We will be banning conversion therapy very shortly.
Thank you very much. And thank you also for that commitment to ban conversion practices. Thank you. I now want to ask a question that has come through, and I want to allow any of our panelists to respond to this. So the question is, feminist and LGBTI advocacy is often claimed to be from the global north or Western. And how can we engage politicians in such environments and counter this narrative? Who of my panelists would like to respond to this? Honorable Valerie Woods, I see you turned on your camera, so I'm going to let you start.
Thanks, Maria. That propaganda has been around and is flagged so much in discussions when it comes to, particularly I've found in small states like Belize, that we are importing the issue, that this is not an issue that is specific to Belize. Again, you know, it's as a woman and as a woman parliamentarian, I do not need to be told what's happening in other countries. I can share my experiences of what I go through. And to combat that propaganda, particularly as we speak about and for the LGBTQ plus community, it is to share stories that are happening long before we even became a bit more comfortable speaking about it in public. The stories are real. The experiences are absolutely dire and they're critical. It's just that we have not been talking about it for various reasons. That has not come to light. So every time that propaganda that it's coming from the north, it is a foreign concept. It is not something that is, for the lack of a better term, local or native to us. I like to challenge that by sharing stories of discrimination that has been occurring, that is real, has nothing to do with what's happening outside of Belize. I also will hastily add, Maria, that it's not all experiences that's happening here necessarily is happening elsewhere, and vice versa. And so for those who come with that line or that argument, indeed, it's not that all countries are going through the same experiences at the same time, but there are some shared experiences that we cannot escape from, and that we have to be able to collaborate and dialogue with other countries. That's not importing. That's trying to grapple and understand, how is it that you are dealing with this, and how can I, within our societal norms, culture, and all the nuances of our individual countries, how can we grapple with it? But it is not imported. It is absolute propaganda when it is used, and it should be called out every time.
Thank you very much. So there is another question that a couple of people have actually asked about, and that's about the situation in Iran. And I thought maybe we can broaden it and say, like, how can you also help and try to influence the situation in other countries? So it's kind of like the opposite of the question that I just asked you, Honorable Woods. Yes, Honorable Esther Passaris, would you like to take a stab at this? Like, how can you help with other countries? Just briefly, because we're coming up on time. You are still muted.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so right now we've got so many countries that are on board, and I think Copenhagen, the meeting at Copenhagen will actually bring more people on board. The more we keep having conversations about this and learning about each other's and learning about the best practices and what laws have been passed, I think people need building blocks. What are civil society doing? What are the people themselves doing? The community doing on its own? What is the private sector doing? What are the churches? How are we handling the churches or the various religious sects? That conversation, I think the more platforms we have to engage and to share, but then again, at the end of the day, whatever you want to do, including when we had the women's movement and the women wanted rights, it was everything. It was drama, it was culture, it was songs, it was poetry, it was concerts, it was movements, demonstrations. I mean, before I became a parliamentarian, one day I was just called in for a demo, and I was told it was to help sex workers because they were being victimized by police. And I decided, yes, I'm going to go, because if they're on the streets doing their job and then eventually they're getting arrested and getting raped in the cells, let me go. So we went for that, and I met a whole community, so for me, we went for this march and we were not arrested. We had the march, we said what we had to do. So I feel that we need to do a bit more of that. So we need to share all these conversations and all these action plans, the laws, and how you've managed to combat whatever it is that we're dealing with. Especially for Kenya, it's we've got Catholics for Choice, and they are also helping with certain conversations. So I believe that as long as we keep the fire burning, we will eventually get there. One step in this country, another step in another country. Because whatever happens in Kenya, if Kenya sneezes, the neighboring countries, which are 7 neighboring countries, will all get the flu. So you start off by having one country in one region that is doing the right thing, then the others will follow suit.
Thank you very much. So we are a quarter to the hour, and so I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Ulrike Lunacek, the former Vice President of the European Parliament and former Co-President of the European Parliament's LGBTI Intergroup, and also Master of Ceremonies at the Interparliamentary Plenary Assembly of Copenhagen 2021. Ms. Lunacek, please.
Well, thank you very much, Maria, and thank you also for PGA and the government of Denmark and other governments organizing this beautiful event. when I was a bit listening to you now, is I was feeling, well, when I started in politics around more than 25 years ago, and in Austria, very sort of rather conservative, very Catholic country in the center of Europe, I was the only one that publicly said I'm a lesbian. There was no gay politician either. There was hardly anybody around who I knew. I knew my friends, but apart from that. So I would have loved having a discussion like that 25 years ago. Just to tell you a bit of where we've come from. We've come from a long way and we have changed a lot. I think we have managed as parliamentarians, but of course, as I think at least 2 or 3 of the panelists said, together with civil society, really to change lots of people's minds and hearts. But of course, our task as politicians, or me as a former politician and you as parliamentarians, is really, and you've said that so well, that we make laws, and it's about the rules, how we live together in society. And that, of course, means that those who, what was the topic right now, who say, well, this is just a Western concept and lesbians, gays, bisexual, trans, intersex people don't exist in society. Some autocrats, some religious leaders still are saying that and making life very, very hard for people, even imprisoning them, killing them. We know that's still the case. So our issue is an important one and is something we will struggle on still for a long while. But what this session here shows, that things have changed, that many countries now have laws, have organizations, and that parliamentarians play an important role in there. So I was really happy to see so many examples of not just, as I said, as you said, working with civil society, but also it's important to go beyond laws, beyond what is written, because this changing of people's minds and hearts, changing also party structures, all kinds of organizations, this really is difficult to do. I loved what one of you said, that being heterosexual doesn't mean you're a better human being. I think this is so important as well. Use humor also as trying to convince others. Overcoming fear and hatred. I always, one of my sort of mottos was to tell everybody, you know, it's normal to be different. What if we all were the same? Crazy, how boring would it be? So, and also you don't decide who you fall in love with. It's simply something that happens to you. And well, so all of that should be it is part of human life. The examples you have given today are very strong ones. I also like the one where you said that it could also be a problem when you speak openly about it, or where you are an ally of LGBTI people, that you have problems getting elected the next time. Well, that also needs to change. Yeah, because I know some parliamentarians who simply are gay or lesbian, and they simply don't say so because they're afraid of losing votes. I mean, it's really time to change that, and we see that with your examples. So with all of that, I'm really very optimistic that the Interparliamentary Plenary Assembly that we're going to hold during Copenhagen 2021 on the 20th of August 2021, hopefully many of you, and I know quite a few of you have signed up already, also of those who are attending, I hope this will really be something we can see each other in person. If not, then it will be virtual, but it will be so important because it will allow us to share our strategies, to share what we have achieved, and of course also to look ahead what we still need to do and where we can improve. And some of you also said is the importance of having allies. Allies, as a lesbian woman, I say that in the straight world, allies as a feminist, I say also among straight women, and of course also among straight men, because this is society for all of us. And the prejudices are still there in so many people's minds and hearts. And one of the questions that has been asked, how to change that? I think just with being visible, with talking about it, as you also said, this really helps, giving real examples that LGBTI people have existed in all cultures, all over the world, in all of human life, and still do exist and will keep existing. And you cannot just say it's not that's not the case. So we will strengthen our networks there. We will create and support more structures. And it will be important also to look at how we can, as parliamentarians, being from government or opposition, how we can push our being parliamentarian, sorry, how we can push our governments in order to really support structures that give LGBTI people more freedom to live the way they want to live, because that's what it is. And I think with the passion that I've heard here and the energy and the creativity of so many of you, I think this will be a great thing. And I'm so much looking forward to seeing you all in Copenhagen in August of this year. So stay well, and let's continue our struggle to make this world also a better one for LGBTIQ people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those passionate remarks. I mean, Outright Action International is an organization that has been around for 30 years, more than 30 years. And so, of course, there has been a lot of progress. And I see that sort of this energetic groundswell that we are seeing and passion that we're seeing on this panel will help us move the needle forward even more. We're about to come to a close, and I now want to introduce our last speaker, Alba Rueda, Undersecretary for Diversity Policies at the Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversities of Argentina. And she will be speaking in Spanish, and we will post a link to the remarks in English in the chat box. You can find it there so you can follow along. Please, Ms. Rueda, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Buen día a todos. Y mi intervención en la mañana de hoy tiene que ver con establecer de que efectivamente la perspectiva de diversidad permite asumir que las mujeres, lesbianas, trans, gays, bisexuales, intersexuales y todas nuestras identidades de género tienen un rol protagónico en la construcción de una agenda más justa e igualitaria. Esta premisa la vemos plasmada en el cuerpo legislativo y las políticas públicas que hoy en Argentina permite hablar de género y necesariamente también hacer la mención del eje de la diversidad. Esta ampliación de la noción de igualdad es en gran medida el efecto de las demandas transfeministas, de los movimientos de mujeres y diversidades en todo nuestro país. Y en este sentido, las personas LGBT también somos defensoras de la igualdad y la inclusión de la diversidad. Y esto supone que nosotros, como destinatarios muchas veces de las políticas públicas, debemos tener una voz propia. La acción transfeminista se basa en promover la ampliación de las voces de los destinatarios de estas políticas, quienes históricamente vivimos en los márgenes de la administración pública, de la economía y la política, hoy podemos ser actores sociales y políticos de nuestras políticas públicas. Entre los avances más significativos en materia legislativa, Argentina puede destacarse porque efectivamente ha llevado adelante un proceso que ha permitido fortalecer esta perspectiva. La suscripción de la CEDAW en 1985, la Convención de Belén do Pará en el 94, la sanción de una ley que es de protección integral para prevenir, sancionar y erradicar la violencia contra las mujeres en los ámbitos donde desarrollemos nuestras relaciones interpersonales, que fue del año 2009, la ley de educación sexual que aborda justamente el eje de los contenidos sobre el tema de diversidades dentro de todos los ámbitos educativos, y una ley muy significativa para nuestro país que es la ley de matrimonio igualitario en el año 2010. Y además quisiera destacar que en el año 2012 se aprobó la ley de identidad de género, poniendo al Estado en un rol completamente administrativo, sin evaluaciones judiciales o sin evaluaciones administrativas sobre quiénes somos. El derecho a la identidad es un derecho propio, personal, y tiene que ver con que el Estado resguarde el libre desarrollo de cada persona. Además, también quisiera destacar la ley de paridad de género dentro de las listas para los candidatos tanto de senadores, diputados nacionales y parlamentarios del Mercosur, que fue aprobada en el año 2017. Y en el 2018, la ley conocida como la Ley Micaela permite establecer una capacitación obligatoria de la temática de género y diversidad para todas las personas que se desempeñan en la función pública. Finalmente, el año pasado, en el año 2020, se destacaron dos leyes significativas en materia de ampliación de derechos. La Ley Nacional de Atención y Cuidado Integral a la Salud durante el embarazo y la primera infancia, y por supuesto la Ley de Interrupción Voluntaria del Embarazo, donde todas las personas gestantes son reconocidas, reconociendo también así la autonomía de las mujeres, lesbianas, varones trans y personas no binarias. En esta consolidación del Compromiso Nacional por la Igualdad, en el año 2019 se crea el Ministerio de las Mujeres, Géneros y Diversidad de la Nación, con el objetivo de transformar las políticas de género y diversidad en políticas de Estado, y que trasciendan, por supuesto, los gobiernos, y que se constituya en materia, digamos, de políticas públicas para poder consolidar nuestros ejes. Allí quisiera traer algunos de los puntos más significativos para nuestra agenda política. Principalmente el decreto 721 del año 2020, que establece que el cupo laboral travesti trans debe ser una realidad en el sector público nacional, resguardando que al menos el 1% de la totalidad de los cargos y contratos son destinados para personas trans, travestis y transexuales. Y esto resulta, por supuesto, como resultado de una enorme decisión de nuestro presidente de la Nación, Alberto Fernández, para promover el ingreso de las personas trans en el Estado. También debemos decir que existe hoy un tratamiento en el ámbito legislativo que resguarde, digamos, que promueve la sanción de esta ley. Y además me gustaría hacer una mención simplemente de los ejes de la línea de políticas públicas que nosotras estamos desarrollando. En el año 2020 se creó el Programa de Fortalecimiento en el Acceso a los Derechos para las Personas Travestis, Transexuales y Transgénero, y un Registro Nacional de Promotoras Territoriales en Género y Diversidad a nivel comunitario. Se generaron programas que tienen que ver justamente y están vinculados con un Plan Nacional de Acción contra las Violencias por Motivos de Género, donde una de las grandes definiciones es este cambio de paradigma donde se aborda la diversidad sexual, es decir, las realidades de violencias de las personas LGBT dentro de ese Plan Nacional de Acción contra las Violencias. El programa Acompañar, y así como el programa de Igualdad en la Diversidad, son dos de los ejes temáticos más significativos que tenemos. El Plan Nacional de Igualdad en la Diversidad son los compromisos de los 22 ministerios para generar políticas públicas sustentables que hablen sobre el abordaje de las violencias y promover y resguardar los derechos de las personas LGBT en nuestro país. Por lo tanto, y por todo esto lo que mencionamos, resaltamos nuestro compromiso que tenemos en Argentina con la mano de la definición política de jerarquizar una agenda del eje de diversidad. Construir políticas públicas desde una perspectiva transfeminista que nos permita transformar y transformarnos en un ejercicio real y efectivo de los derechos. Nos encontramos desarrollando políticas que vienen a revertir asimetrías históricas que nos atravesaron a toda la comunidad LGBT, y nos basamos en una fuerte articulación con las organizaciones sociales, los movimientos políticos, como lo sostuvimos siempre, que somos quienes justamente impulsamos la creación de este Ministerio de las Mujeres, Géneros y Diversidad. Muchísimas gracias por el tiempo y muy buenos días a todos.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. I know we did not get to all the questions, and so if people have questions that they didn't get answered, if you leave your email address, PGA will try to get back to you with a response. But unfortunately, this has been a great pleasure to be with you all today. I want to thank everyone who attended. I want to thank all the organizers and co-sponsors, and I really want to thank from all my heart all of our fabulous, wonderful speakers today who made this great event possible. Thank you everyone for participating, and please let's all keep up the good fight to advance rights of LGBTI people and of women as advocates for equality and inclusion. So thank you everyone. I want to invite all of our speakers to just remain for a bit, and we'll take a group photo. Instead of scrambling to get together on stage, we're gonna do a group photo on Zoom. So please, if you just stay, and thank you everyone. Have a great day.
Maria, I have to run off to another meeting starting here at 11.
No, I understand. Monica, are you trying to organize us to get a group photo?
Yes,
before we lose more people?
You're doing great. We'll stay for one more minute. And we're
Okay.
done. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Monica.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thanks to PGA. All right.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Maria.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you so
good
much.
afternoon or a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye,
Yeah,
think-
have a great
everybody.
day, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Tack så mycket.
Gott att se dig. Hej.
Thank you, Miss Ellemann. Thank you so much, Miss Ellemann. Take care. Thanks so much, Maria. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Talk to you
Thank
soon.
you, Maria.
Thank you.